Hello and welcome to the third in this series about creating a scenic test track. This episode focuses on the ballasting process that I've been through and also the building of a bridge. Now, before I get into the ballasting, the first thing I felt I needed to do was to paint the sides of the rails. The rails I've used are Code 80, so they are slightly over scale, but they accept all the flanges for N gauge, even the very old ones. So painting the rail sides helps disguise the height of it. I've just simply used a paint that's ready-made. It's called frame dirt. It's an acrylic in this case, and I'm guessing some of the chairs as well, but that's absolutely fine. I know a lot of people would airbrush it. Don't have an airbrush, so a paintbrush works just as well. I would recommend using a cheap and nasty old paintbrush because you do trash for paintbrushes doing this. It's far better to do it before you've got the ballast laid because the paint then doesn't get onto the ballast itself. It's important to not get paint on the sides of the blades of the points because those are used partly for conducting the electric. Now the next thing I needed to do, I decided to put a platform in. I'm going to use the Scalescenes platforming. To make sure I didn't get the ballast in the way, they provide a small edging piece. So I laid those edging pieces, curving them to shape, making sure that they don't obstruct the longest bit of rolling stock I own, in this case a Class 800. And as can be seen, it rolls past without any issues, but it gives a nice edge for ballasting up against. Now, again, I still haven't got onto the ballasting yet, but I needed to know how wide to make the ballasting, where the bridge was going to go, and also where the tunnel mouths were going to go. I've already made the tunnel mouths, so this shows the process of making the bridge. Again, it's a Scalescenes product. I love these just because they cost you once, but then you can download and print them as many times as you want, use them as many times as you want. With a little bit of skill, they're very easy to modify if you require. In this case, I haven't modified it. It's as it's meant to be. There's a couple of minor mistakes on it. I always seem to make those, but actually I don't think it's particularly noticeable. The one bit I haven't shown with the making of this is the spraying with varnish. Again, the spraying with varnish is really important. It just helps protect the print finish from any dampness that's around and stops it staining or spreading further. The biggest pain I find with these is the retaining walls. They're set, you're meant to cut them at about a 45-degree angle. You need to really think about how much of the angle you want on your retaining walls. I've cut them at 45 degrees in the past and found that it's far too shallow an angle, and I want a steeper angle there ready. The other thing to remember about these Scalescenes products is that they are scale height, so the clearances can be very, very tight. So you have to be quite precise. And you can't use them particularly well on dual track, set track layouts. Right, now we're getting onto the ballasting itself. First thing I always do with ballasting, I dry lay the ballast. So I'll just pour it on and pat it into place. Sometimes I'll use a brush, sometimes I'll just tap the top of the track. Once I've ballasted it, once I've put the dry ballast in place, you then need to wet it. Just with water with a bit of fairy liquid in to ensure that the surface tension is broken in the water. it helps stop the ballast floating up. In N-gauge, that's always a challenge, I find, to stop it floating up. Sometimes I'll mist the ballast using the same sort of product, but at other times I'll just use a teaspoon and run the water down the rails itself. Running it down the rails again helps it prevent it lifting. With double O gauge it works very well. With N gauge the ballast tends to be so light you always get a certain amount of lifting, even when you mist it. Ballasting is one of those very time-consuming, laborious tasks. Some people find it very therapeutic, some people absolutely loathe it. I think I'm probably somewhere in between. I really appreciate it once it's done. I do find it can take a long time, and it can be a bit frustrating when it doesn't go quite as tidily as I would like. What I'm doing just here, I'm just trying to tidy up the ballast where it's floated up a little bit before I put any glue on it. Tidying it up works sometimes. In this case it didn't work so well. The more time and care you take over doing your ballast, the better it will look, however. It's kind of the same with everything. The more time you put into it, the better the end result tends to be. Right, we're now on to adding the glue. I've used a watered down PVA here. It's about 50-50 PVA water mix. Again, I've got some very liquid mixed in within it to break the surface tension and to stop the ballast lifting as much as it could do. And again, I'm just running it along the track rather than dropping it straight on. Running it on the track, and say, disturbs it less. On the shoulders, I can get away with dropping it on, but it's between the track that you can't do it quite as well. You can use different types of glue if you prefer. The track itself is laid down with PVA, so it doesn't have any bearing on the level of sound gluing the ballast down with PVA. If you're worried about the level of sound and you haven't glued your track down with PVA, then something like Evo Stick will do it just as well, but it's that slightly more rubbery texture and it allows the ballast to move about and it doesn't resonate quite as much. One thing to note with PVA, with some granite ballasts, the PVA has been known to turn them green. I can't say I've ever had that myself. Possibly I've just sourced my ballast from elsewhere. In this case, the ballast that I'm using is extra fine Woodland Scenics ballast. On my main layout, I do use sand rather than a commercial ballast. Not shown in this video, but one of the things I do later on, once the scenics are more in place, I'll give the ballast a wash of a paint just to dirty it up a bit and to make it look more used rather than a pristine ballast. If I wanted to represent a bit of ballasting that had only just been laid at that point, I probably wouldn't dirty it up, but that's something I will do at a later date. I'm using the tunnel mouths and the bridge. I've been able to make sure that I haven't put ballast in places I don't want it. Once the ballast has had quite a long time to dry, good 48 hours, I then go over with an old jeweller's screwdriver and I remove all the excess bits of ballast. chances are I'll still be doing this in a few months' time, because every time I look I tend to see another little bit that I've missed, but a blunt old screwdriver will do the job absolutely fine. It'll just knock it off. You also need to just make sure that you're knocking it off the inside of the rails. For knocking it off the inside of the rails, I actually use a small probe tool. It's slightly sharper and just digs the ballast out from the rails. Another key tool for finding out where there's bits of ballast on the edge of the rails is to use the oldest, nastiest bit of rolling stock you've got, the one with the deepest flanges. That will show you where every bit of ballast is, because it will bump up and down. And most importantly, we have to test the track when it's finished, don't we? So here we can see that loco and coaches are running round. There's no noticeable bumping on the ballast, so that would suggest that I've managed to clear it off the rails and away from where the flanges are. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found it useful. It shows the progress I've been making. The next video will come in about a week's time, and that will show a little bit of electrical work to be done on the layout. If you've enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. See you next time. Stay safe.